It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to A Piece of Pie, the queer film podcast. We took a bit of a hiatus and we are back for Pride. I am back with Max and Mike. We're talking new queer cinema once again. This time it's The Opposite of Sex, starring Christina Ricci and Lisa Kudrow. Lisa Kudrow, I currently have a Funko Pop of Lisa Kudrow on my desk for Phoebe. And then, but I'm a Cheerleader, starring Natasha Lyonne and queer icon Clea Duvall. Welcome, boys. Thanks for hopping on this podcast, and happy Pride.
Happy Pride. Thanks for having me back.
Welcome back, Michael. We're glad to have you back. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun, Brian. You know, last time that we were talking together, we were covering new queer cinema in My Own Private Idaho and The Living End. Now we're moving to the later 90s with this, to what is, I think, affectionately known as new queer Hollywood, as indie films are starting to get more money and a little bit more budgets. That was certainly the case for Opposite of Sex, which really started to break through being shown in more theaters, but also in award ceremonies. If you haven't seen it before, spoilers are about to come, but the movie does focus on Christina Ricci's character, 16-year-old Dee Dee Truitt, who runs away from home. She is pregnant from her white trash boyfriend, moves in with her older half-brother, Bill, played by Martin Donovan, who is a gay teacher in a conservative suburban community in Indiana. I know a lot of Midwestern feelings that are brought up by this film. Her older brother, Bill, is living with his boyfriend, Matt, but is still mourning the loss of his previous partner, Tom, who had died of AIDS sometime before. And Bill maintains her friendship with Tom's younger sister, Lucia, who is played by Lisa Kudrow. Now, this creates the whole drama of the film. As all of these sitcom type of characters are thrown together, it's quite a mess. So when was the first time that you guys watched this film?
I had only seen it once before. I watched it for the second time yesterday in preparation for this. But I watched it in high school, and so I would have rented it like in 99, 2000. And I remember not particularly liking it. So I was excited to revisit it. And in watching it, I think it was for two reasons. One, I was just figuring out I was gay, and I was really resistant to narratives about sexual fluidity. So the fact that Christina Ricci's brother is dating someone who then she's successfully able to seduce, I was like, wait a minute, I don't want anyone to watch this and tell me that I can just flip back and forth. I just couldn't process that. But also a significant monologue where she talks about how sex is dangerous. And at a time when I was absolutely not sexually active, that was kind of scary to me. So I think I left the movie feeling that it was somewhat sour and not to my liking at the time. I do like it a little bit more.
Yeah, I also saw it on VHS. I rented it. I was just about to move to Chicago. I feel like I probably had it on VHS by the time I moved here. I don't remember specifically the first time I saw it, but I remember seeing it and liking it a lot and thinking it was really funny, and liking Lisa Kudrow. Like I said, I'm a fan. My cat's name is Phoebe. So I watched it and I loved it mostly as a fan of her. And I at the time, I was like a young teenager. I was 19. I had figured out that I was gay, but I was also very not sexually active. And I had grown up in the late 90s, like post The Living End and Private Idaho, growing up terrified of sex. Like, I feel like we are in that generation that came of age where movies like Philadelphia were coming out and like Elton John was holding benefits and things, but we were children in a very straight communities and straight worlds. And we didn't relate to anything that way. And it just scared the shit out of us in terms of having sex. Like, it's 100% the reason I didn't have sex until later in life. So those kinds of things, like, I thought they were funny when she's talking about how gross sex is, but it's also like having never had sex. Like, I didn't get it. I don't know. It was weird. But this is the first time I've watched it in about 20 years. I found myself really kind of disliking Christina Ricci and siding with Martin Donovan.
I believe that we're all the older brother Bill at this point. We're the younger generation.
And I loved his like monologue when he's like, I've survived Republican presidents, every other Democratic president, a deadly virus. Like, I'm not going to take shit from you right now.
That felt very much like Don Roos is like, I'm going to insert this monologue to the baby gays and let them know what we went through. Johnny Galecki.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, Don Russo's already, I think, like, fashioned himself after Paul Lynde in the 70s and like the old Gay Brigade before. So it makes it even
And he had done Single White Female. That was his big like breakthrough screenplay.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. I need to rewatch that.
I actually, it's on Stars, and I rewatched it recently.
Perfect.
Which was how I learned I was like, oh, Don Russo did the screenplay. This was like during the downtime when I watch a lot of movies that I don't have to talk about later.
You know, I think this was an interesting one. I really had to remember the first time that I saw this. Usually I kind of remember exactly if I saw a movie in the theater or how, but I had to look back, and this was probably the gayest way to come about this film. But I'd first heard about with Oscar conversation with Lisa Kudrow when they were having her campaign, and she was winning and nominated for Independent Spirit Awards. And I remember tracking this in Entertainment Weekly in 1998 for the 1999 Oscars, heading into that year, the year that Shakespeare in Love won. So like this movie kind of weirdly grew in my mind of this gay film that had come out, that it was a little bit notorious, and that Lisa Kudrow, and I was a big fan of Friends at that time. It was my mother's favorite show. We watched it probably 3 times a day because it was on that many goddamn times on syndication. So I was happy for Phoebe to be nominated for an Oscar. But I don't think that I'd saw it until 1999, where I rented it from the local library that had a very lax policy, I think, in renting things out to children or at least to 14-year-olds who were trying to say it was a school project or something. But I remember also feeling quite, the movie wants to make you feel uncomfortable. It has very irascible characters. It has very abrasive characters. It is very much a reaction to the AIDS and HIV crisis and a lot of the films that were getting made throughout the 90s. I think that the filmmakers and Don Root coming out and being kind of like, I want to make a different type of film that's also in reaction to that too. And, for all the turns and all the nastiness, that's at the core of this film, it kind of ends up in almost a sweet place, or at least a little bit warm, or at least with found queer family for some and others, and pairs up Lisa Kudrow with Lyle Lovett.
No, it's funny because as you were saying that, I was reminded of the last time I was on, we were talking about The Living End, and Brian, how you had described that whole film felt like a primal scream, right? And I feel like this film it's doing a similar thing, but it's much more through its dialogue. It's much more verbose. Although I'm of two minds, and I'm sure we'll get into this. I think it is very scathing, and I think it is biting in some really funny and impressive ways. But then I also think it tries too hard to earn that sweetness at the end that I think if they had trusted the audience a bit more, we would have landed on ourselves.
No, it does have that TV sitcom near feel by the end of it, even though that we've really gone and seen some dark things and things that these characters have said.
Yeah, and I feel like the ending is the sort of Hollywood compromise. This is how we get this released, is we have to kind of give everything a kind of pat ending. Because if we're really and truly going to be honest about who these people are and what's going to happen, they're probably, like, at best, it makes sense that she would stay with the brother if they've made up. But everything else, I feel like it's a Hollywood ending.
And these are the things that were changing. I think a lot of the new queer cinema films of the early 90s were a little bit more fatalist, were maybe a little bit more realistic, either in an artistic way or a bleak way, but they realized the bleakness of what it was to be a queer person in 1992 versus what it was to be in 1998, almost on a cusp of acceptance. But if you were the right kind of gay, or if you were the well-behaved gay, and that people like Dee Dee could, still get away with murder because they're straight, they're pregnant, they're normal, or at least they're more normal in the eyes of the law than her brother Bill.
When Christina Ricci introduces herself to her brother's new boyfriend, she says, "I'm a real relation." And then there's a lot of really flippant references to the fact that Bill's former lover has died of AIDS. Like in that respect, it's almost like because we had Philadelphia, we can now make these kind of gallows humor references and jokes about these topics. One issue I had, I guess, with the movie was with how aggressive the voiceover was, and in a sense that it calls itself out, and I think eventually it stops being irreverent and becomes more like excuses for some of the flaws maybe in the writing, when I think there's so many really funny moments and lines, like when I think Dee Dee asks Lucia, she says, "How does a woman get so bitter?" And Lucia, without missing a beat, says observation. Like that just seems like that seems straight out of like a terms of endearment, as good as it gets, like James L. Brooks kind of thing. That I feel like the voiceover overcompensates in a way that's what I found most grating on this watch. And then kind of similar to what you were saying, Brian, about why maybe Christina Ricci in particular was so unlikable, but maybe not as compelling to watch as the best unlikable characters.
Yeah, she just kind of like comes into this like gay man's life and blows it up. Like I said, I like his reaction to it, and I like how he basically is like not taking any shit from her. I think they're fun opponents to watch.
Okay, well then I'll elect myself to go on DD defense, but it was what I felt when I first saw it. And when I just rewatched it recently though too, is around this time one of my favorite shows that I'd watch clandestinely was Stranger with Candy, and people like Jerry Blank and John Waters movies when I could fit them in. So transgressive and gross characters I was a big fan of. And with Didi, she's so abrasive and so obnoxious, yet she's the one that's not saying pleasant truths. She is basically like the white trash that will say exactly to her gay brother what the rest of the world thinks about him, but isn't wrapped in like nice tolerance or avoiding the situation, or what a lot of like white liberals were doing at that moment of being kind of like, well, we'll accept you. We won't try to put you in the hospitals anymore under the definition of insanity. And we really like, as you're showing up in more of these movies, when you're really funny, like in The Birdcage, but like that's about all that we can handle. Like, don't try to make your own families, don't get married, don't have babies. And I think that movie starts to address what was coming in the 2000s and the 2010s. And Didi really was that mouthpiece for the rest of America, of that bubbling id that was kept over by that nicety in the way that they treated a lot of gay people at this time. That said, Michael's absolutely right. And this movie is rewatching it, that voiceover, like the movie literally never shuts up then. We never have almost a moment to ourselves because it's consistently so talky and so kind of TV oriented that way.
Yeah, she brings up Chekhov's gun, and then the gun reappears like 40 minutes later, like in the middle of the movie. It's not like I didn't even have time to forget about it. And you're already like, you remember this is going to happen. Like, I know there are a lot of opinions about, how voiceovers are kind of a cheat for screenwriting. And
the whole movie of adaptation says that.
Right, exactly. I think it was just even the humor that was supposed to come from that didn't seem to match what I thought were really biting, smart jokes that came naturally through the dialogue between the characters.
Yeah, it's very catty. I love that about it. That's probably my favorite thing about it is like the dialogue.
Well, most of them come from our two leading ladies, which is definitely, we know that a gay man wrote it.
So what I love about this movie, though, although kind of veering away from the movie and more towards Lisa Kudrow and Don Roos, they have worked together ever since. He and Dan Bucatinsky, I believe they're partners, are constantly in each other's work. And the comeback web therapy that Lisa Kudrow show, like basically anything that Lisa Kudrow's in, he's a credited writer for, which I love. No,
he's definitely stayed successful in TV, writing for many other different shows. His partner Dan, too, who Michael, would know, ended up winning an Emmy for.
Oh, Scandal.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, he had a great show-stopping moment. Yes. Well-deserved Emmy.
But a lot of this movie's success then, I think, seeded their success and other things, because Dan ended up doing another film not long after this called All Over the Guy. That's another one in this kind of new queer Hollywood and semi-successful indies. So it was nice to see that this film really, and the success critically of this film really, I think, opened the doors for a lot more snarky but interesting indies that were seen by a lot more audiences than the films of new queer cinema were, or not relegated to the art houses anymore that you could see at your local mall movie theater.
Right. And I think that Lisa Kudrow is, I was going to say she's a secret weapon, but not so secret. I mean, I think she was, like you were saying, Max, at the beginning, there was tons of support for her for the Oscars to be Best Supporting Actress. She was on our TV screens pretty, consistently. You couldn't escape Friends at the time. But I was really struck by what it must have been like to see her in this role at that time, because we only knew her as Phoebe Buffay. And now looking back, I mean, I wish I had a Funko Pop of her as Valerie Cherish.
Yes. I want them to make one. I don't think they make them, do they?
They don't, and they need to. And I think, I guess, in terms of this film in particular, what also struck me this time is because I did really like it, and I do think it's funny, despite some of the gripes I have about the voiceover and Christina Ricci. But I think where that line is drawn for me is that Lucia could be a really unlikable. I think it's written as a very unlikable character, but Lisa Kudrow, just like Valerie Cherish, it's a character that you are compelled to watch, and you want to see what they're going to do, what they're going to say. And I think that she really, I only wanted to focus on her. And there was like a 25 minute stretch where Christina Ricci was not on screen, still giving voiceover on action that she has no knowledge of, but whatever. And when she kind of re-entered, I was like, no, I just want to stick to Lisa Kudrow. And I thought it was a really interesting contrast in how they're both playing unlikable characters, but Lisa Kudrow just in this respect, and I love Christina Ricci, but Lisa Kudrow in this role makes that compelling and makes persuasive cases for a lot of her seemingly grating arguments.
Absolutely, Michael. I mean, not only was Lisa Kudrow, she wasn't a movie star, she was a TV star, but billions of people over the planet were watching Friends and knew her at this point. And Christina Ricci, lest we forget, had several hit movies under her belt as a child actress. She had headlined both the Addams Family movies and was obviously the best part of Addams Family Values, but had done so many more now and then and things. So by the time
Casper.
by the time that she had taken this role, this was a big stretch for her, too. Somebody who had gone from America's Sweetheart, or at least more comedic type of roles, to play such an unlikable character, too. So I remember there was a lot of talk in 98 of their campaigns for both of their awards being like, this is so different for them. They're so unlikable. And they didn't even have to wear any nose prosthetics or anything.
I remember it being scandalous that Christina Ricci smoked in the movie.
While pregnant.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she smokes, she drinks. I mean, that poor baby. Yeah, I don't know. I do really like her. Something about her portrayal in this, I don't know. It just didn't work for me as much, despite the fact that I think she's a fantastic actress and can bring that kind of spiky, spunky personality traits to a lot of her roles. I think because she was so clearly a mouthpiece. And I think I liked what you were saying earlier, Max, about how her voiceover and dialogue is written to kind of comment on what maybe white, straight America is subconsciously or consciously wanting out of their gay characters. She's doing the part, right? I guess just for me, it was something I didn't find interesting to watch as much as other unlikable characters.
Mm-hmm. Well, and who the heck knew that Jonathan Galicki would probably be the richest and the most seen actor out of all of them right now, too. Even more than Lisa Kudrow. Tell you the truth, I had completely forgotten that was the subplot. I remember that Jonathan Galicki was in it, and he was like this little asshole that everyone liked to slap around. But I totally forgot that it was also pinned on, this whole teacher-student and pedophilia scandal too. So you get that type of acid thrown into the mix already in a pretty dark story.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that whole plot line. That was crazy. It feels like it's if they wouldn't have added that now. That would not be there now if this came out. Not
as a joke that they don't pay attention to for 45 minutes and then gets wrapped up with a shrug.
Yeah, that's fair.
But you're right, Brian. Absolutely, there's no way that would be a joke, let alone a plot line in 2020, 2021.
I do think the movie is trying to poke in the eye again of straight America, because teachers were losing their jobs left and right around this time in 98. You didn't have to work for a Catholic university. If you worked for a public school, you could lose your job if you were outed, because there was the public assumption that if you were gay, you were a pedophile. And certainly that was all throughout the Midwest. And I grew up with a lot of that type of feeling, if you had a gay teacher or people who stayed in the closet because of that. And I think that this is this movie's kind of sitcom-y way of going again over the top, but in a way of being kind of no, Bill's the nicest, most normal person in this film. All of these goobers are the ones that are the problem. Again, it's not handled sensitively or thoughtfully or gracefully in any way whatsoever. And I think, this is a tricky movie. It does not have one genre. And I think the rest of Don Roos's films, happy endings after this. The romantic comedies that Dan Bukatinsky made after this were more dramedy than they were official romantic comedy. This does work on its own way as a satire, at least a little bit of a modern, this is what life is like in 1998 type of way. But, it really does exist to poke a lot of fingers in eyes. But it is one that comes from a big place of empathy. And that big place of empathy comes from Bill and Lucia, for people who dealt with real grief and with real loss, and their beloved partner and brother who died of AIDS. And, you know, at this time in 98, you know, we're starting to move on a little bit from the worst of the epidemic. You know, better treatments were coming. People were living longer. It was starting to be around the crest where it wasn't going to be a death sentence anymore. But we're still very much of people who lived through an epidemic that the government did nothing about and people really did nothing about, and they watched a lot of their friends die. So this movie still comes from a place of sadness that both of those characters very much share. We're just layered upon with all these other shenanigans and dumb teenagers and Ivan Sergei in a nice skimpy bathing suit with his beautiful big eyebrows.
It kind of feels like it's taking every single like weird sort of like stereotype about gay people in the 90s and just sort of like throwing acid on them. Like you said, like the trope of a teacher being falsely accused of an inappropriate relationship, the one that's died of AIDS, the one that's like, you know what I'm saying? Like where it's all of the worst things that people were saying about us. Mm-hmm. They are taking those.
That sleeps with a woman because
and they're like he puts all of it in there. Oh, and she was nominated. Christina Ricci was nominated for a Golden Globe.
Yes, and they both were for Independent Spirit Awards. So they didn't break into the Oscars, but they got real darn close, which
Wait, was this the year that Judi Dench won for like 5 minutes of Shakespeare in Love?
This was the year that
really?
This was the year that Miramax paid off nearly the entirety of the Oscars.
Oh my God.
In the face of Saving Private Ryan and a bunch of other better films. This is the same year as Gods and Monsters.
Oh, yeah.
This was also a year where Ian McKellen, a gay out actor, was nominated for playing a gay character. So this 98 really ended up being a watershed year, at least in representation, or movies really breaking through critically at this time, as well as making a bit more money at the movie theaters.
I do think it helps that you have, and to go back to Lisa Kudrow, it helps to have someone like Lisa Kudrow attached. Because I feel like it's low risk for her, because if it doesn't make any money, it doesn't make any money. But if it does, having her star power attached to this, I think certainly helps it get made.
At this time, she's making $1 million an episode over at Friends. So
Insane.
She can just, basically take a long vacation and make 3 independent films if she wants.
Yeah, she'd been doing like a string of indie movies. There was one called Clock Watchers. She does have a small cameo in Mother, Albert Brooks's Mother.
That's right. I love that mother. I love all the mothers out there. The Bong Joon-ho one, Darren Aronofsky, but I especially love Albert Brooks's mother.
Yeah, they're all very different.
Yes, yeah. I probably wouldn't marathon them, but I just wanted to point out 2 real quick lines that I actually laughed out loud watching this. And one was when Matt wants to call the cops and he phones the lobby of the hotel. And he's like, yeah, I think it's a business. The police? I couldn't. That, and when they talk about arresting.
That is like a perfect blueprint for himbos to come and film. And I love him so dearly for that line.
He's the perfect himbo. And then when they're talking about arresting Johnny Galecki, and I think Lyle Lovett says, well, maybe prison will smarten him up. And Lisa Kudrow says, only if his brains are in his ass. I died. And again, where I think the script really succeeds in being really biting and genuinely funny when it's maybe not trying too hard to do so.
Yeah, it was fun to watch Opposite of Sex again. I had forgotten how much I had actually remembered, and then complete subplots that I completely forgot. Like I knew Lyle Lovett was in it, but I forgot like how useless of a character he really was.
We didn't really get into it, but I also was like, he could get it. Like I get why Julia Roberts married him for a minute.
No, young Lyle Lovett. I feel like we grew up with him where he was always just like that mass of wrinkles.
Right.
Aged very quickly after this. But there was that time where it was just kind of like, yeah, I like a string bean. So
do we want to move on to our other film, But I'm a Cheerleader?
I think that sounds good.
We'll move on to But I'm a Cheerleader. But first, let's take a quick break. We'll see you on the other side.
Fremont power, Fremont pride, be aggressive, drive, 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 go Fremont!
Megan, we love you. Lately, we've become concerned about certain behaviors.
You don't have any pictures of guys, just these.
You don't even like to kiss me.
It's true.
Honey, we think you're a
Lesbian.
I myself was once a gay. Now I'm an ex-gay, Megan. I work for a place called True Directions
Welcome, welcome, welcome.
who help people like yourself.
I'm Sinead. I like pain. I'm homosexual.
I'm Graham, and I like girls a lot.
I shouldn't even be here.
You don't have any unnatural thoughts. I don't think it's unnatural.
I'm not perverted. I'm a cheerleader.
Be aggressive, try.
I'm a homosexual. I'm a homosexual.
Her melody.
For the first time in 4K. Celebrate the classic comedy.
Boys, don't you see how sad and pathetic you all are?
About growing up.
This is bull, Megan. It doesn't work. You are who you are. The only trick is not getting caught.
Coming out.
Who wants to go down with me?
And breaking free.
There's not just one way to be a lesbian. You just have to continue to be who you are.
5, 6, 7, 8. God is good. God is strange.
She drove me on the back of her Harley like I was some showpiece.
Simulated sexual lifestyle. What about foreplay?
Foreplay is for sissies.
Mom!
But I'm a Cheerleader Director's Cut. Look for it on 4K Ultra HD.
And we're back, and we're talking But I'm a Cheerleader, starring Clea Duvall and Natasha Lyonne.
Brian, I'm so happy that you agreed to do this one. This one's been one of my personal favorites since I first saw it as a kid, pretty quickly as it came out in 2000, and that we're covering it today. And then also part of 2 of these movies in the new queer Hollywood. This one, though, was not much of a critical hit at the time, and kind of has really flown under the radar for quite a while, but has had cult fans like myself. But 20 years later, its reputation has really turned around.
Yeah, I've wanted to do this one for a while. For the longest, I wanted to actually pair it with Clueless, which was funny because I read that article in Variety that I sent you, Max, and she was like, I was trying to make a gay Clueless. And I was like, oh, that would have been funny. Oh, wow. But no, this is a great pairing too, because they're both very like of the moment. And it has a total, I mean, it's also a completely different vibe, but it's very John Waters, brightly colored suburbia and the weird queer people who inhabit it.
Yeah, I think this one, if we're pairing it with Opposite of Sex, does it has a really nice balance of the sour and sweet. The ending in particular, I think, is just really well done and lovely. But yeah, it still has a bite, and it definitely is more in line with the John Waters than earlier new queer cinema that I think maybe Opposite of Sex is more of a direct antecedent of.
Well, this one certainly leans much more into the satire. Very much, I mean, like our last film, taking the issues of the day and controversy and things that young queer people were subjected to, specifically conversion camps, and looking at it in a satirical and comedic way, but still having really kind of a heart of gold at the center of it. And this one, I do think, as Michael said, works and earns maybe its happy ending or its warm ending a little bit more between its characters, which was revolutionary in 1999 too, having not only a film made by a lesbian director about lesbians, but one that was going to end happy and them getting the hell out of that place.
Yeah, I actually remember seeing this one in the theater when it came out. I was working at Landmark, and I went to see it. And I remember I downloaded a couple of the songs from the soundtrack off of Napster when I got home. Yeah, I like I said, I saw this in the theater, but it's not one that I've revisited a lot. But it is one that I've had in mind to talk about, and it was a lot of fun revisiting it this week because I had forgotten how I remembered mostly the general concept and not much else. Yeah, it was a lot of fun to rewatch this week.
I was trying to remember when I first saw it. I know I would have rented it, and I'm 90% sure the first time I rented it, I fast forwarded any scene that did not have Eddie Cibrian. I think that was all that was on my radar, and I don't know if I just got pulled in by the plot that first rental or if a friend encouraged me. Like I was like, okay, I'll rent this movie and actually watch it. But I was surprised when I watched it again for this podcast. I thought I'd only seen this a few times, but I was really struck by how many of the lines and the scenes like had kind of burrowed into my psyche. I think this might have been one of the few gay films I came to at the right age and probably watched more than, like certainly more than others like Get Real or Edge of 17 at the time, which is unusual because those were about gay boys like myself. I think this was my queer film that hit me right in that sweet spot.
Me too, Michael. This was one that became my favorite quickly on. But like you said, this was a coming of age film in the midst of a lot of those films coming out around this time too. A lot of male-centered stories are gay male-centered stories, and a lot of them, most of them white. But this was part of where Hollywood and a lot of other independent studios were catching up at this point and starting to tell these stories because they were also starting to be profitable. Not this film at first, but at least they were able to attract a pretty amazing cast here. But like you said, Michael, my first initial thoughts when I remember seeing this was another one where I caught it in 2000 on IFC late at night and immediately imprinted on my brain, not just all of its pastel colors and all the great lines and everything else that I love about it, and Kathy Moriarty doing her best Kathleen Turner, in that same type of smoky voice, but definitely Eddie Cibrian and also Dante Basco, Rufio from Hook, making out with Kip Pardue. These were things for a 14-year-old to be, it was really envisioned in my brain. And it was like, maybe I could watch that again, or that's going to play at 1 a.m. again at IFC. I'm going to stay up for that one again and be real quiet when I'm watching it. This one definitely brought a lot of puberty into the picture for myself in ways that Opposite of Sex did not.
You mentioned that cast, but you didn't mention, speaking of John Waters, Mink Stoll as the mother, and Bud Cort from Harold and Maude. Harold!
You have obviously a director and a creative team that loves cult films, that are aiming for their own type of really weird cult film aesthetic they've got in this. They brought in RuPaul. I remember seeing this, obviously this is pre-Drag Race. So this is Ru making herself over as the drag godmother and billionaire fracker that we know, maybe not so loved today. But, she was still a big star. And this was coming off of both the Brady Bunch movies where I had recognized that. Both of those tapes got worn out on VHS. And maybe should be covered in its own podcast because they're certainly gay enough for it, Brian.
I do think there was a period in the 90s when she was arguably the most famous queer person in America.
And definitely in the
and probably maybe still is, but I don't know, Elton John, and I don't know.
I remember that there was a good chatter, in Entertainment Weekly and others of like, this was RuPaul's first boy role. I think that we, for us who do watch.
Oh, it is RuPaul Charles.
Yes, this is RuPaul Charles.
Yes.
But, I think for people and listeners who know, watching Boy Ru walk into, the workroom and all the crazy suits, audiences didn't know who Ru looked like without all of the makeup and wigs. So, and it's not a great performance, but it's one that plays into the fake butchness. And I always thought, the whole point of the film being that ex-gay is never ex-gay, that it's all just another lie that you tell yourself. But tell you the truth, I think had falsely remembered for so long that RuPaul and Eddie Cibrian had hooked up at the end, but they never actually do. I think I just connected those dots.
No, they both,
everybody else too.
They both got blue balls by the end. That never gets consummated, unfortunately. No, you bring up a great point that I think, growing up, like when I saw this, I knew RuPaul as from the Brady Bunch movies, but also she had her talk show on VH1. So when RuPaul Charles as a man comes in, he's the heavy they send in for the initial intervention. But that kind of carries into what stood out to me on this watch was how much of it plays like a military film, the conversion camp, and how that scene where Melanie Linsky is walking Natasha Lyonne to her bunk and she's laying down the rules and the camera's shaky and then just there's so many montages that you would see, I'm just thinking Goldie Hawn jumping over things and Private Benjamin or something like that. It really it plays off of those tropes in a way that again just adds to the satire and is really amusing.
Michael, I've never thought about it that before. I've seen this movie at least 20 times, and you're absolutely right. It's like a prison film. It's a prison escape movie in its way.
I love the cutouts, the soldier cutouts that they were running next to, of the man down on his knees and the other man standing over him holding a gun that is at waist level.
It's so much
Well,
fun.
the movie is not subtle, and that's one of the many things I enjoy about it. But yes, I love as much as it possibly can point out how fucking gay straight people actually are, or the ideal straight person is.
I like too that it kind of plays with the notion that as if this is this like backwards notion that if somehow you could like chop wood, you would be a heterosexual. One of my favorite lines is when Natasha Lyonne is talking to Graham and she's like, women have roles. Once you realize that, maybe you'll stop objectifying them. Which was like just this revolting like point of view, but like I like that they kind of were like treading that water even 20 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a film that's not just attacking conversion therapy and that it's attacking the whole idea of gender roles at this time. Things that are still relevant. How many more fucking forests do we have to burn down for a gender reveal party? An explosion of blue or pink like we get in this movie. You feel like we might be able to move on from this silliness, but there's obviously a huge part of our country that never will. And I think that that's what this movie will always stay a bit timeless. But I also think why this movie will stay timeless because it does end so hopefully, because the best thing for everybody to do is to get the fuck out of there. Michael said it, as we were moving on from a lot maybe of the fatalism of new queer cinema into more hopefulness, this movie kind of ends almost like an It Gets Better campaign, and it earns it.
I had kind of forgotten that there's that scene around the middle of the film when Natasha Lyonne and Clea Duvall, they have an intimate moment together, and Natasha reveals that she's happiest when she's cheering, and Clea says, "Oh, I'd love to see that," and just the way that dovetails so perfectly with her breakout, Clea's breakout at the end. Yeah, I'm sure I didn't think of it at the time because I was just really soaking in as many movies as I could when I was in high school and just kind of really figuring out what my tastes were, how revolutionary it was for a queer film to end have a happy ending. I don't think I appreciated it on those terms at the time. Makes it easy to want to rewatch in the years since.
I gotta love a film that challenges heteronormativity and says, this is actually weirder and grosser than who we are. It's something that when this came out in 1999 still needed to be said. And unfortunately, still continues to have that message for folks living out in the sticks that, you gotta wear pink or you gotta wear blue. You gotta be able to chop wood. It's something that really did strike at that time. That's still part of the conversation in 99 of, is homosexuality learned? Is homosexuality by nature, nurture, or nature? And this was very much a film that answered that of course it's nature, or at least it's us, stupid. Stop trying to make people or fit people in the boxes that they can't fit into.
Right. No amount of Kathy Moriarty yelling at you from a bullhorn 3 feet away while you're simulating sex is going to change that.
I don't know. That might get me pretty close.
Yeah, fair enough. I have to say, one thing I never noticed until this watch, this was random and I'm not sure why, but it made me laugh out loud, was when Natasha Lyonne gets a call from her parents. And as she's on the phone, you see Kathy Moriarty in bed in the background, like listening in, but she's like tuning a guitar. And I'm like, where did that come from? And even that just feels like this weird, like she would probably tell her female soldiers that that's not appropriate behavior. But then like you were saying, Max, just the behavior of the straight characters is, not that there's anything unusual about that, but like it doesn't seem maybe ladylike to be in bed with your instrument. I don't know. A different instrument maybe.
That's actually really funny, Michael. Brian and I were just reading an article that talked about that. That's the scene that was apparently cut out of the film, is Kathy Moriarty has a song and comes from the director Jamie Babbitt's own history, where her mother ran a treatment facility for drug and alcohol and had heard a version of Both Sides Now that was anti-drug and learned it with these lyrics for like a good portion of her childhood, and then was driving around later in her life and heard that song on the radio and thought it was an original song from her mother and got freaked out. But apparently they had a number that was going to be cut out of Kathy Moriarty singing to a pop song of anti-gay lyrics.
That reminds me, because the version that I bought on iTunes is the director's cut, and I don't know if that was what you watched.
I didn't realize there was one until I saw, I think on Wikipedia, that there were two different versions. I saw the theatrical 85-minute cut.
So I watched the director's cut, Brian, and there's barely any difference. from what I can see. It seems to be, as I was looking up some of the info, is that this film was initially rated as NC-17 for being gay. Really just nothing that's not shown in other type of films. It was just two people of the same sex kissing and doing these scenes. And it really took a lot of small cuts or other cuts to get it down to R. This was, I remember Jamie Babbitt popping up in the film. This film was not yet rated, as one of the main people to talk about how the MPAA is very homophobic, will give harsher ratings for gay content. And you know what? And still does to this day.
That's probably how Showgirls got NC-17.
Well, Showgirls got 17 for, let's say.
I mean, that didn't help. It didn't help.
But this film doesn't even have, any specific nudity. It does not have even the type of language that opposite.
No, it's not even,
My biggest guess is that, this was a film that dealt with young people and queer people weren't shamed. And in fact, were the heroes and were kind of told to run away at the end. And I think that something as conservative as the MPAA would want to shut that down. But that was one of the why, I really latched onto this film in 1999 is that this was the first time I was seeing gay characters my age, or at least playing my age, that seemed more real or seemed more funny or seemed more weird and then ended happily, rather than just being a side character in a film or being the funny friend or the Rupert Everett role in My Best Friend's Wedding, or the things that were already codifying themselves into cliches at this point, even though this movie does traffic in quite a few cliches.
Well, one of the other things I wanted to mention in relation to this movie was Richard Mole. And Night Court's Richard Mole, and Larry, is it Larry and Lloyd's little safe haven? Just the thought that that's a place that I hope there's a house out by these gay conversion camps like that. That was I just thought that was really sweet, and I loved those characters for that. I liked it a lot.
I'm glad you brought that up. This is, I think, another thing that was true to life. And, there were a lot of networks for folks to get them out of abusive situations or conversion camps and the like. And to tell you the truth, it gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling to rewatch that too, because I remember there used to be several in Chicago when I first, was a young undergrad over at Loyola of house-based resource centers that did HIV testing because campuses wouldn't, and that I would go get tested there sometimes. Ultimately, that's what Chicago House grew out of people who were just working out of their own house, helping people, or the Meals on Wheels programs here in Chicago during the middle of the AIDS crisis. So it's nice, Larry and Lloyd are obviously affectionately kooky, just the rest of all of our characters, and played by sitcom stars. But, I think is also still based off of real people, and that's where this movie does shine, that it's able to have these cartoonish type of situations and performances that still get distilled back down into real history and real heart.
Growing up, I used to watch on the Disney Channel that show Adventures in Wonderland when I was a kid, and the non-Night Court actor, I don't know his name, but he played the caterpillar in that children's show. And I remember watching this movie and I was like, the caterpillar from Adventures in Wonderland is this gay hero, saving. I was like, oh, so there is hope. I don't know. It was amusing. And I also watched Night Court, but I don't think I made that connection at the time that I saw this. But you're right that it adds this. They fit into the universe of the film in like you were saying, Max, the kookiness, but also just really, really hopeful and poignant addition.
I mean, we've been talking about the cast. We might as well just name the rest of them. But I mean, you've got Melanie Lynskey in it. You've got Michelle Williams in one of her first roles before she starts, being nominated for Oscars left and right. You got Julie Delpy showing up as a lesbian.
Yes!
So random, but very welcome.
I think I'm shocked every single time, as many times as I've seen that movie, that I have to ask myself, is that Julie Delpy?
I also want to shout out the actor who plays Andre. I don't have his name at the moment, but I love his introduction. Actor, dancer, homosexual. And I'm just like, you didn't say singer, but that's okay. You have the trifecta there. I always find him to be one of the funniest.
He knows his limitations, Michael. It's a good homosexual at this point to know, given how many times that I tried out for co-choir, okay?
Fair enough.
Yeah, it has that sort of tone throughout, and it really allows it to address something as horrifying as a gay conversion camp and make it not seem so terrible and populate it with ridiculousness in such a way that, yeah, you can kind of play it for laughs, where they have like the outhouse that they put him inside and things like that. And like the bar called the Cocksucker. Like it's all very, very broad so that you can kind of touch on all of these things. And I think that helps. And like the brightly colored, the pinks and the blues and all of that really like comes into play there. And it really helps the design and everything. And it's like, well, like we said, it's very John Waters, very like Hairspray.
And you just reminded me, Brian, that like in stark contrast to, I think just the last few years, I feel like there have been movies that I haven't seen, but that are serious dramas about gay conversion camps, like Boy Erased, I think, with Lucas Hedges. And it's, I would much rather watch this as my reassuring, like, it's going to be okay. And I think those films certainly have are well intended, but I think it's almost just, it's so horrific that you need this, what Jamie Babbitt does with this, with the colors and the tone, you need that to really temper just how awful the reality of that is.
Michael, that's a really interesting point. I think, the difference of like, why, we're still making these films, these camps still exist, but I suppose those films were Boy Erased is for like straight audiences, and this film was very clearly for a queer audience. And I got to say, I absolutely fell in love with your description of it as this like prison movie or prison escape movie, where most of the films is about this community or found family you find, inside, that are basically the message of like, don't let them break you. This is just temporary. We're going to get out of here. And there's something of that message that really kind of shines through with using some of those prison escape film tropes throughout, including, the boo box.
I had forgotten, actually, I wrote down though that, yeah, Kathy Moriarty, when Natasha Lyonne first gets there, she says, one of our soldiers is going to walk you to your room. And then it cuts to Melanie saying like, wake up, it's 7 a.m. or whatever, that speech. And it's like, I think that's where I made that connection. It's much more explicit than I had picked up on in the past.
All right. Well, as a big fan of this film and somebody who's been pushing to cover this one for a while, my rewatch this time around again did remind me this wasn't the biggest critical hit at first. And I will admit, I can see why. This film has many tones and it does not stick to one of them. So it does keep it a little bit all over the place and really doesn't commit to something as serious or as bitter or as campy or anything else. It really kind of rides a little bit down, kind of a middle or this sweet ambivalence. And that also means that it's kind of paced a little bit saggily. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of great scenes. We have a lot of great lines. This film is very memorable, but you really could show a lot of these scenes almost out of order up until, like kids start getting kicked out. So I can see where a lot of critics maybe wrote it off at first or thought that it might have been derivative. But obviously this film has had a lot of staying power. It's something that's meant a lot to a lot of people and unfortunately stays relevant. But I also think that it's just one of those like comfort queer films, cult films that people can, again, they don't have a copy of it on VHS anymore or on DVD, but if it pops up on, a phone app or on Tubi or on like Pluto TV, that seems like somebody will go like, I love that film and watch it to the end.
I actually, as I often do when I'm watching a movie that I haven't seen in a while, and it was released when Roger Ebert was alive, I'll look up his review. And I was pleased to note that he gave it 3 stars, but he didn't spend a lot of, I also noticed when I'm reading it, I was like, he doesn't spend a lot of time like really singing its praises or saying what he really likes about it, but he kind of like dances around it in this interesting way. But at the same time, it was a 3-star review, and I feel like coming from Roger Ebert, I would take that.
I agree. I feel like Roger Ebert in his reviews, even if a movie wasn't for him, that wouldn't be a demerit, right? He always saw the value in something.
Yeah.
No, I want to go back and read that.
Yeah. It's fun because they're always linked on the Internet Movie Database page. So I'll read the trivia and then I'll read Roger Ebert's review. So it's all like a one-stop shop.
Yeah, I was looking up some of the other critical responses at the time. Again, a lot of ones focus on it being a John Waters knockoff or being derivative of other campy artists because, John Waters was still working at the time. He was still having hit movies or was about to run out of steam. But around the same time that Pecker came out. So he was nearing his end. But this, and this is why I think I like it coined as this new queer Hollywood. Other independent artists and other people were about to start taking over. But a couple that we got coming up, Brian, but is Trick and Broken Hearts Club. You're going to start seeing a lot more, independent films start embracing good old fashioned cliches, but that they're gay characters or queer characters or lesbians. And it's wonderful that we're about to see a lot more of these films just start to just pop up and be themselves, even if they aren't perfect films.
Yeah, I'm excited. We've got some fun stuff lined up for June, so I'm excited for that. Do we have more we want to say about But I'm a Cheerleader, or should we say something gay about it?
The only thought I just had when you were talking about how the reviews cited John Waters pretty consistently, and that makes sense, right? Like we all see those influences here as well. I could see where maybe there might be disappointment if you're going in expecting that 100% like that John Waters tone and maybe not anticipating the sweetness, how that could maybe sour your initial takeaway. If you go in thinking, oh, this is just going to be another John Waters comedy, you might not be ready for the sweetness that comes with it. So as you guys were both talking about the reviews, it made me wonder if that may have hampered some of its initial reception.
Did critics really praise John Waters? Honestly, I honestly don't know. I'm sort of a rhetorical question, I guess, but
I guess I wasn't even thinking so much about if he was praised, but so much as if I read a review and a reviewer referred to it as John Waters like.
Yeah.
And I was somebody who loved John Waters, and then I went to see this, queer or not, I could see how that might be a disappointment.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. What does it say on Rotten Tomatoes? Now I'm curious.
I'm not sure.
It's very much much like the way My Own Private Idaho and The Living End were, and even The Opposite of Sex. It's very much pointed and directed at a queer audience, and they have in time they have all found queer audiences. I mean, But I'm a Cheerleader. Honestly, you put Mink Stoll and Bud Corden in it, you're ensuring that like no one's gonna like it right now, but 20 years from now they'll love it. Like that's their MO.
Oh. This is, sorry to interrupt, but this was shockingly not well reviewed by quite a few critics. Now that I'm looking at it, Metacritic, where it holds a 38%, including a 0 in F score from Owen Gleiberman at Entertainment Weekly.
Jeez.
Which I do remember that. But if you remember at that time, Owen Gleiberman gave Fs to everything, to just put a big stink bomb in the toilet every now and then. He gave an F to Oh Brother, Where Art Thou when it came out. So Owen Gleiberman has been wrong.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I am very, very happy that it seems to be that time has proven this movie right, and that it continues to be held up and is now being talked about at length by aging millennials like ourselves.
We're building the new queer canon ourselves with this podcast.
Both of these films, I think, are worthy additions to go into that new queer vault.
Absolutely. Did we want to move on to say something gay about it? Something gay about these two films?
I think I already said my two gay between Eddie Cibrian and Ivan Sergey, which again, give me a dark-haired or floppy-haired, big-eyebrowed himbo, and I'm going to fall in love, especially around this time. So I'm going to go that I loved the But I'm a Cheerleader soundtrack is fantastic, and I loved and had on CD for a while, and that RuPaul dedicated a track to, or at least wrote one, Party Train, which I do not remember if I'm being honest.
I don't remember that either. Maybe it'll show up on the next season of Drag Race. It's funny, the makeout scene in the beginning of But I'm a Cheerleader, when Natasha Lyonne's making out with her boyfriend, and she just has her eyes open the whole time. And first of all, I mean, no one is going to enjoy that level of a tongue, or maybe I'm wrong, that could be speaking, but it stood out to me because as a particularly gay moment, because I did have a friend in high school, one of the first girls I came out with, and I remember telling her I was very nervous about kissing someone for the first time and being good at it, and she volunteered to teach me. And so we parked at like an ice cream shop and spent like 30 minutes making out in the back of her car, and it was really awkward, and I did not feel any more confident leaving that moment in particular was really resonated with me.
So you've lived through that moment where you had to think about Michelle Williams' panties to get you through it, right?
I was probably thinking of her in H2O and Josh Hartnett running away.
Oh, Josh Hartnett.
With his sexy Romulan haircut in that movie.
Yeah.
More Tom Lakey boys.
Before I move on to say something gay about it, I did want to throw out that one of the notes that I made was that Jamie Babbitt also later directed Natasha Lyonne in her Netflix series, Russian Doll. which is one of my favorite shows of the last few years. Certainly one of my favorite shows on Netflix. But like they've maintained a friendship all the years. But just speaking, we had talked about Don Ruse and Lisa Kudrow. I thought it was worth mentioning that Jamie Babbitt has continued to work in television and things with Clea Duvall, who of course wrote and directed Happiest Season, which none of us liked, but good for her.
That one wasn't for us either, was it?
Right, exactly. That's plain. Again, it's like these movies are made for a specific audience.
Right.
And my say something gay is that if, I don't know, Clea Duvall could get it if I was a lesbian, for sure. Like, she's fucking hot, despite how much I didn't like her movie. She's real hot in this movie. I've always, and I love her like tendency to show up in movies smoking a cigarette and delivering information. Like in Zodiac.
I feel like too.
She does it in Zodiac. There's another one too where she just like is smoking and talking to a cop character. I don't remember what it is. I can find out. But
I remember her popping up in Argo, and that surprised me. I don't remember if she had a cigarette, but I remember thinking, "Oh, okay, all right."
Oh, that's right. She was one of the captives, right? Or one of the hostages. Yeah.
Always happy to see her.
I fell in love with this character in Graham too, and that's a name that's always stuck with me. And it's one I actually ended up naming my cat. Also for like Will Graham off of Hannibal. So Graham is a very gay name for me, and I passed it on to my cat.
Nice.
I feel like Graham is a hot name. Every Graham I've known has been hot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hot name. Damn it. Thank you so much for coming on, talking more queer cinema. Like I said, we've got some great stuff coming up in June, so everybody stay tuned for that. Do you want to hit us with your social media, boys?
Sure. Thanks again for having me. I am on Letterboxd and Instagram and Twitter, all with the same username, HEYMELI6. I'm very active on Letterboxd, somewhat on Instagram, and minimally on Twitter.
And I'm at Max Bever on Instagram if you want to find me there.
Thanks so much. I'm Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I, ROWE, on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again for giving us a listen. Thanks again to you guys for coming on. Happy Pride, everybody.
Here's to the start of Pride.
Happy Pride.